Hello, my name is Autumn Brown with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program, and for our Art, Activism, and Education Oral History Project, I'm here today on June 23rd, 2022 with Amari Ford so that he can talk about his experiences with the arts in Tulsa. So thanks, Amari, for talking to me today.
Yeah.
Let's just start with what were you like as a child? Like, what was a young Amari like growing up?
Um, hmm. I took to music pretty early, and I like to read a lot. Um, so I was the kid who would like have a flashlight in a book at night underneath the covers, trying to sneak and read. Um, Book It, Pizza Hut, like me, all over that.
I remember those.
Um, so yeah, I wasn't really into sports. Like I did play baseball for a little bit, but once that got to interfere with like orchestra practice after school, I was like, okay, well, can't do baseball anymore. But yeah, I think I was curious, creative, and I just maybe a little different from other people that I saw, but yeah, just living the dream, not paying rent.
Right. We thought we had it bad then, huh?
Okay.
Man. So, like, growing up, you were into books. You said you took to music pretty early, but what's like your earliest experience where you can remember, like, falling in love with music and being like, this is it?
Yeah, so, I grew up in church. My grandfather was a pastor. And I have a cousin named LaDonna who is a singer. And so she sang in groups and stuff. And so I would go with her to rehearsals and sit. And I would go with her to like workshops at church. And whenever we'd be together in the car, like maybe she'd be learning a song or something, like, I'd be learning the song with her. And cassettes were a thing of the 90s. And so she had a little boombox and we would record like songs like by Kurt Franklin and Fred Hammond. And, we'd harmonize and make a little cassette recording. So that's really when I think back to kind of like how I got started in music. And like, I think that being around her really helped to cultivate my love of music. And I even think now about the way that I learn songs. It's very much how like she would learn songs. So yeah, like that was probably the defining moment where it's like, yeah, music is. And I don't know that I was fully aware of it. Because, as a quote unquote trained musician, there are certain ideas about what formal training is. And I think for the longest time, I didn't really consider that to be formal training because it's my cousin and we singing like in her room. But, she really did have a really great impact on the way that I like interpret music and just so many, I think, important areas for a musician. Like, I can look back now and see how formative she was in my cultivation as a musician.
Do you remember how old you were when you started doing music with your cousin?
I was probably like 4 or 5. Like I was,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I was a little thing. Definitely elementary school. And even I remember like I directed my first song at church when I was in like 2nd grade.
Oh my gosh.
Like my mom directed choirs, and so there's a picture actually where she's up directing the choir, and then I'm standing next to her at like 2 years old while she directs the choir. But yeah, it was pretty early on that. Yeah, I think people just thought like, oh yeah, he's really into this music thing.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of seems like you have family, like your lineage is in music,
Right.
Your mom, your cousin.
Yeah, because my grandfather was a pastor, they had 13 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them learned to play piano, had a uncle who played drums, and they had a group called the Servants of God. So my grandpa would go preach, "Here come the servants of God." And they would have these programs on Saturdays at 4:00. And all these people would come and sing, and it'd be so long. But like, that was a thing. And I think even that's another example of sort of like this formal introduction to music that for the longest time I would have discounted, because the academy says like, this is what training looks like. But yeah, cousins that were in band and stuff in school. And so it was, music was all around me. But probably just in different forms than I would have kind of categorized in terms of like training and exposure. But yeah.
How significant was it for you to kind of grow up in the church and then to grow up in the church and be introduced to music in the church and then to do music in the church?
I don't know. Like that's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever thought about. Because I think probably in the moment I was just doing it. Probably once I started playing for church, there were sort of these, I want to play at that church, or I want to play like this person. But in the beginning, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, we're at church, we're singing, we're learning songs, like this is fun. And then as I got older, it was kind of like, okay, well now I just get to play and it's still fun. But yeah, I don't know that I've ever thought of like that, that particular like pathway of kind of being in the church and then sort of being more of a leader in the church and in music. And so yeah, I don't know, that's interesting. I might have to think some more about that.
So one thing you've spoken about a couple of times is like the idea of being formally trained and then how you were trained, which is still a sense of formal training, but you've like made this clear distinction between like what the academy considers formal and then how you were trained. So can you kind of talk to that a little bit about like formal training versus this community training? I don't even know what you would call that, but it's still training.
Well, they would probably call it informal training, but like especially now, a lot of my work is kind of dispelling the notion of essentially these barriers that white people have created to kind of keep everybody else in a box. But I think about, like when I think about the most like prominent musicians and the most like musically gifted people, like church musicians are right up at the top. Like the way that, especially in like a choir in a Black church, there has to be a lot of, like you have to really be in the moment, because you could be playing and that soloist decides she's gonna do something else. Or the director decides he actually wants to jump to this other thing that you may not have even rehearsed. So you really do always have to be ready. And then, there's just, you have to be really engaged and focused in that moment. Because there are so many things that could happen. And because we are in those environments where, you kind of do have to improvise and be ready on the spot, that really creates for some really beautiful musical moments. And so I think about, even when I'm playing in an orchestra, the way that I approach a phrase is like a little bit different because of my experience in the Black church. The way that I feel the music and the way that I like forecast what's going to happen. It's all of that is informed by my experience in the church. And even I had one of my best friends now, but we were working at church together. He was the minister of music, I was the musician. And we were doing some song. And so I did something. He was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, the song is over. It's like, but that's not how you end a phrase. I was like, okay. And so he, like, in rehearsal is like coaching me through how I should end a phrase. And that's happening at church.
Wow.
I'd never been coached that way about ending a phrase in school like I was at church.
Wow.
But yeah, there's this idea about formal training. So learning to read music and learning all these Italian terms that tell you how to do certain techniques. Yeah, that is sort of like the standard. But what is really interesting is that as classical musicians, there tends to be this centering of this Eurocentric white male. So people talk about Mozart and Bach a lot. But the interesting thing is that when those people were writing music, they were a lot different than what classical musicians are today, because those people improvised. And if you go up to a classical musician today and be like, if you go up to an orchestra and ask how many people can improvise, it might be real slim. And if you say like, hey, I want you to improvise right now, like people might cry.
Wow.
But that's what you're upholding. But this is like what they did. Oh. They improvised solos. They played several instruments. So it's really interesting that like whiteness is upholding this system, but only part of it.
Wow.
And so, there are comments made about like Black church musicians. There was even one of the president of the National Association for Music Educators made a comment about how like Black church musicians weren't good and qualified and all this other stuff. And it's like, when's the last time you've been to a Black church? Because all the ones that I know can play you under a table.
Yeah.
In 8 different keys.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so it's really interesting that just this one part of it gets upheld as the standard, and then the rest is like, oh, well, I mean, you don't really need to improvise in orchestra music. That's like a jazz thing. And, it's kind of this very snooty, elitist type thing.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so a lot of my work is to break all that shit down because, yeah, again, you're not even upholding like the whole system.
Yeah.
And who are you to be the authority on like what is standard, what is part of the canon? And yeah, I hate all of that.
Well, so you brought up a lot of good things. First, from my understanding, it seems like what's being upheld from classical music is whiteness and whiteness alone.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about improvisation, and you just talked about how in the church, like you had to be ready. Like the soloists make a lot, the director. So it seems like in totality, classical music is something that's almost being upheld in the Black church. Like, or this idea of like classical music, it's something that you guys have already been doing, but you're not white. So then they automatically say, no, it's not this. But it seems foundationally like you guys are employing a lot of those tenets.
It's music.
Yeah.
And that's what I think these categories, right, are a way to box you in, to be able to label you and be like, oh, I'm not fucking with you. Mm-hmm. But the same technique that you need to play those runs in a Chopin nocturne are the same techniques that you need to play them runs when they're shouting. Like, because you're playing a piano.
Right.
It's the same technique. The same thing with singing. You're using your voice. So whether it's opera, choir music, gospel, the way that you use your voice to sing is the way that you use your voice to sing.
Right.
And there are some nuances, techniques that help us to illustrate like a certain genre. Gospel music has a more relaxed sort of position for your mouth, the way that we like enunciate those words, versus classical music tends to be a little more round. because that's sort of like the characteristic sound, but it's a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Just like there are gospel singers who misuse their voice, there are also opera singers who misuse it and, have to do things to correct it. So, yeah, it's the same thing.
Right. And then one thing you said was like ending a phrase. Like you don't end a phrase like that. What does that mean, like to end a phrase musically?
Yeah. So a phrase is like a musical sentence. And so music is full of phrases. So if you think of like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, How I Wonder What You Are, that's like a phrase. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky, another phrase. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, How I Wonder What You Are. And so, I could play that probably at least 4 different ways because some of it is depending on how I feel or what I might want to illustrate. Am I going to be really bold with this ending of how I wonder what you are or how I wonder what you are? Maybe I'll slow down a little bit. There are a lot of different ways to end a phrase based on what you want to convey through the music. And like in church, it can be different every time you do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another thing that there are just so many components versus in classical music, we try to like rehearse things to make it the same every time. And maybe there's a little bit of flexibility depending on, how well you know the other members of the group, but you kind of rehearse so that you just do it the same way. Yeah. And I'm like, but what if I don't feel the same way that I did yesterday? And that's music, being able to make those decisions and being able to convey emotion through like the choices that we make.
Mm-hmm. So this is also interesting. And you mentioned like Italian phrases. I started piano lessons yesterday. Right?
Okay.
And the phrase mezzo forte comes to mind.
Yeah.
But it's like all these phrases that she was trying to tell me, and I'm like, so it's basically soft, medium, and loud.
Correct.
Like.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just, I guess, in thinking about that, I'm like, that is interesting. How it's just like, well, just tell me soft, medium, or loud. But I guess the formalities of it is like, oh, I'm playing in mezzo forte.
And I mean, I actually just had a conversation about this recently. So I wrote an art song. So an art song is poetry that is set to music. Which, Black people know that is like rhythm and poetry, rap. Mm-hmm. But like in the classical world, it's an art song. So I wrote this art song and I had a colleague to edit. Like this colleague is a vocalist, also plays piano, grew up in church, all that stuff. So I had him to edit the piece. And so in my music, I try very hard to use American words because I'm American. And for me, that also adds like a level of accessibility. But also like, we're not in Italy, like we're not in Germany. I'm not gonna use those words because the American language. And so after he edited the score, he's like, oh yeah, and I just fixed all those like slowing down and, I just put like rallentando and retardando. And I meant to circle back to tell him like why I did that. So I ended up saying, hey, the reason why I don't use those Italian words is because I try really hard to use American words. And so he was really apologetic. But yeah, that's the thing. Like there are some like dynamic markings that are just standard. So to try to say like medium loud, I'll just use mezzo forte, the MF, because most musicians are going to know that. And so it'll be easier for them to recognize. But in terms of like the expressive words that we use to talk about like how fast or slow we're going to play the music, or if we want to slow down, or if we want it to be like singing, those are things that we have American words for.
Yeah.
I don't need to write cantabile because I can just write singing.
Cantabile?
Yeah.
Can you spell that for the transcript?
Sure. Cantabile.
Thanks.
I don't need to write like a retardando. I can just write slowing down because I'm American and mostly Americans are probably going to perform this. But also, if somebody that isn't American doesn't, just like I got to look up these words that are Italian, German, like, yeah, they can do it. It'll be okay.
Yeah, yeah. So so this background of you starting very young in the Black church, your family being musically inclined. So then how do you transition into like, okay, I want to become formally trained? And what does that look like?
You know, that's interesting because I think I was just doing it because I really enjoyed it. But like I knew from when I was in second grade, I wanted to be a teacher. I had a really awesome teacher, and I was like, I want to be a teacher when I grow up. So fourth grade is when I started to play violin. And then I went to a magnet school in Oklahoma City that like focuses on the arts. And so I started to play saxophone, and I'm doing all this music stuff. And I'm like, okay, I still want to be a teacher, but like, this is cool. And I'm learning all these other instruments. And then in 10th grade, I get this orchestra teacher who is like fresh out of grad school. So he's really energetic. He's not too far removed from like pop culture. So he's like the cool teacher. And I was like, oh, I want to be a music teacher. And so, you know, I start to do like some teacher assistant type things at school and take on more responsibility, and then get to college and major in music education. And so like, I mean, when you put the story in context, you could have thought that all this time I was just preparing to be like this professional musician, but that wasn't necessarily like, that wasn't necessarily my goal at the outset. I just really love music. And I also think that because of my experiences, like I didn't feel as equipped to be like a professional musician in relationship to some of my colleagues. So I didn't really have private lessons because I couldn't afford them. And I also didn't know the value of, you know, some of the things that would have made me a better instrumentalist. And so even in college, you know, I'm majoring in music education, I'm taking lessons and stuff. And I'm just like, oh, I would never be a performance major because one, I don't like to practice. Also, I'm not that good. So then it's later when I learned to practice and kind of like have a teacher who's really able to teach me. I'm like, man, if I would have had this 5, 6, 7 years ago, what could I have done? But yeah, so it is interesting because I didn't really intend to necessarily have this musical career, but like I did all the things that helped to set me up for success.
So like you said you love music that much. So what is it about music that just draws you to it, that makes you love it? Like what does music mean to you?
I like, sort of going back to what I was saying earlier, the way that I can take the same phrase and interpret it in so many different ways based on just how I'm feeling or what I want to convey. And I also think that, you know, music is pretty accessible. Everybody can relate to music. You don't have to like learn to hear music like you have to learn to read. You hear it and you're like, oh, like that's really dope, or you know, I don't like it that much. I also like the opportunities for collaboration, to like be in an ensemble with 30, 40, 50 other people. Yeah, there are just like some really special moments that I've shared. And I don't think I've experienced those type of emotions to that degree anywhere else. it's just like it's a mainstay. And even, there are times where maybe I'm feeling a little down and I just go sit at the piano and I might play something that like I know I might make something up, but it's also just a way to kind of release and create these moments to help to cope with this raggedy ass world that we live in, and just like the day-to-day bullshit that we have to encounter. So yeah, it's really special.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think I love music because it allows, well, for me personally, it allows me to tap into a creative side that is not like academic.
Mm-hmm.
Like to tap into a creativity without like the pressure of having to like write a book chapter or write an article, but still be able to like have that creative flow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like low pressure for me at least. Like I'm not a formal musician like you, but like yeah, music really is that. I think. Yeah. It's really universal.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about your life as a music educator. When did you start teaching music, and what does that look like today? And then I want to talk separately about the fact that you're teaching classical music to babies, basically.
Yeah.
So like, talk to me about how you started teaching, and then I want you to really talk about teaching classical music to babies.
So, interestingly enough, right before I'm about to student teach, I failed a course. And I have a 69, and it's a major course, so I have to have a 70. And she's like, I'm not rounding up. I didn't fail the coursework. I just feel like she assigned too much stuff. And I was like, I'm not doing this because I'm tired of reading these 10-page articles and show up to class and you don't talk about it. Like, you don't get to waste my time like that.
Yeah.
But, I took one too many things. So I failed the course. So I switched to being a music performance major, which meant that I had to do a recital that people normally prepare like a year for, at least. But it's January. And I'm like, okay, so I start preparing. I give that recital in August. I move, go to grad school. And because I failed that course, I didn't student teach, so I didn't get my license. Mm-hmm. But I had passed the OOHRP, I had passed the OSAT. So it's like, I'm here, but yeah, so I moved to North Carolina. And I'm working at summer camps and all of this stuff at the same time. I'm working for CDF Freedom Schools, and I'm a trainer, so I'm teaching people how to teach kids who have never worked with kids before.
Wow. So you're teaching.
Yeah. So I, even in high school, like I was teaching. My director, if his kid was sick or something, it was late, like, hey, can you run rehearsal? And so they just knew, like, oh, Amari's running rehearsal today, and like I would run rehearsal. So I was teaching from a pretty early age. But like as an adult, I just wasn't having that sort of formal teaching experience. And it wasn't until I moved back to Oklahoma, I take like a position at a Catholic school to finish out the school year. Then I started teaching in Oklahoma City public schools. And so I ended up going the alternative route, which is like really wild because I was one of the people like, we're not doing that alternative shit because you need to,
right?
Like you need to go to school,
right?
But yeah, that's what I ended up doing, and I started teaching. Title I school, I'm teaching band, and then I started an orchestra there, and then I moved to Edmond and take the OOHRP, pass it, and I'm thinking like, oh no, take the OPTI, pass it, and I'm thinking like, okay, everything's gonna be great. But there's some classes that you take in student teaching that are required for like even the alternative route. Like 2 courses. One is classroom management, but like I've now been teaching.
Teach someone classroom management.
And I forgot what the other course is, but it's like stuff that after I'm teaching for 3 years now, like I've already been doing that.
Yeah.
So I'm still not like officially certified to teach, but like I teach. That's what I do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I get started. Starting at that Catholic school, and I really enjoyed it, but I knew that I wanted to do instrumental music. And there I was just doing general music.
Oh.
So that's why I ended up leaving that position. But yeah, so that's maybe 2018 where I start to teach public school and, sort of getting involved in these organizations that put on events and stuff. And yeah, I end up in Tulsa. A friend of mine, he has a now 5-year-old, but he was like 3 then. It's like, hey, like, Amir School is thinking about adding arts next year to their curriculum. And I was like, oh, that's really dope. And, he had told me things about the school and how he really liked it. It was an all-Black school and just like this really wonderful space that he really enjoyed. And so I was like, okay, well, do they need like a Black man who can teach orchestra or something? Because at that point, I knew I was leaving public school.
Okay.
And I was going to do my own thing. But, it would be nice as an entrepreneur to have some regular income. And so I meet the director of the school, we hit it off, and I'm like, okay, moving to Tulsa. And so I got a chance to start an orchestra at the school with 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And then I also teach general music to our pre-K students. And so, yeah, it's really been one of the best teaching experiences I've ever had. Because although my first like public school teaching job was at a school that was like 95% Black, that school system was just not in good shape when I was there. And that school in particular had very high turnover of teachers, of administrators. And so that community was just really like a yearning for consistency and structure and all these things that as a first year teacher, I could not provide. But yeah, so this program now, it was just perfect. And I have loved, getting to work with these students and getting to expose them to something that many of our students wouldn't have had the opportunity to like really be involved in. Definitely not have the opportunity to be involved in it in a way that centers Blackness. And so, there was some hesitancy at the beginning, particularly with my boys who are like athletic, because they're like, violin, like, we gotta do this again. Well, I gotta do this. And so, but it was so very like affirming at the end of the year to see those same Black boys say like, okay, so Mr. Ford, can we have like that little special thing where it's just the boys again? And okay, well, when are we gonna do this? And, to see them really be fully invested, just really made a world of difference for me. So yeah, I'm really excited to be there again and, help to shape the entire fine arts department now. And it's been just really, really dope to be there. Every other school year, I cannot wait for the breaks to come. This school year, I'm cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a really wonderful experience.
And that's always a good sign to not look forward to all the breaks, because that's definitely a sign of like burnout. We're like, when is spring break? When is summer? Like,
when I crack up when I walk in the teacher's room and they got like 142 days left.
It's like, bro, just
Woo!
That would be more discouraging to walk in and see 150 days dang near left.
Oh, but yeah, that countdown, it's a thing. But I really enjoyed it, and I'm really excited to continue to break up this idea of what classical music is, what music is important, what is considered part of the canon. Yeah, I just love to rip that up.
And like, what does it mean for you? I mean, you're teaching classical music to such young folks, and they're Black. So what does that mean to you to teach music to these Black students, to these Black boys who without you probably wouldn't have any access to this type of training, to this type of music? You know what I mean? Like, what does that mean?
I'm really grateful that I get to be like part of that experience. And I take it like really seriously because like, you know, I didn't have a Black orchestra teacher ever. There would barely be Black kids in orchestra with me. But yeah, I never had a Black orchestra teacher. And, you know, I wish that I could have had that experience, and especially like centering Blackness. And so like my students have performed September by Earth, Wind, and Fire. And, you know, that's something that they probably weren't expecting because orchestra, but that was really special because, you know, that's a classic. And then also to hear from the students to say like, oh yeah, I heard this song like when I'm with my grandma. Or yeah, I told my grandma I was learning it, and so she asked me to play it for her. And so now I'm getting to create like these opportunities for our students to connect with their parents, with their grandparents, and have like these other moments. And then I taught them We Shall Overcome. And, you know, the parents are talking about how they're practicing at home. And we learned Lift Every Voice and Sing, because at the school we sing it. And so that was just easy for them. They already have it in their head. And so like, yeah, I made sure that they knew that Black music is classical music. It is just as important as everything else. And so I think also, you know, at first they didn't necessarily appreciate what was happening, which, I mean, it's a brand new thing. So I would, you know, have candid conversations with them and say, one, there's not a school probably anywhere that has, an all Black school that has an orchestra. Right. And I know that they're not starting orchestra in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Yeah. And I said, you know, how many Black orchestra teachers do you think I had? 5, 10, 4, 0. So, you know, this may be new to you. You may not really understand it, but like, this is also a really great experience that you get to have. Starting to play violin in the 3rd grade, and you have a Black teacher. Your first teacher is a Black teacher. Yeah. So that is a really special opportunity that you get. And it's not like, doesn't make me something special or anything. You know, I get to teach a class full of Black faces. And I get to introduce those instruments in a way that, again, centers Blackness and doesn't like invoke this violent whiteness on them. Yeah. So yeah, it's really like a dream come true, honestly. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's so cute seeing, there was like a video of Amir, and I think he was in your class.
He takes lessons.
Yeah.
So like separately he takes them, yeah.
Yeah, and I just think that is just like the most adorable thing to see little kids. And then to be able to kind of like bridge that generational gap as well through music. So again, we're seeing like how music is unifying and bringing people together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really, really dope.
So I think the moment I fell in love with you and your music was last summer when and I tell everybody about this too, so just know it. because the Invisible Man album by Stevie is my favorite album that he's put out. It's my favorite.
Okay.
And so then you put together a whole orchestra of that album last year at Legacy Fest. Talk to me about like how that even came into fruition, the process, because it was a 16-string quartet. What was the formality of it?
Sure. Stevie is one of my best friends, and when I moved back is right before he was about to do his dissertation album. So that's kind of like, because we were at UCO, I think he got hired at UCO my last year there. So we kind of kept in contact, and then we come back, and I think we're probably following each other's journeys. And so for him, it's like, well, I'm doing music, you're a musician, you need to do this. And I'm like, but this is hip hop, and I don't do hip hop. And so there was like some conversations about that. And he's like, well, actually, you do all these things, and that is hip hop. So yeah, you do hip hop. So we started to work together, and I don't even remember when we got to Invisible Man. I think maybe he had mentioned, what if we had like a band, a live band? I was like, what if we had like an orchestra too? So he's like, what you mean? And so, we just started to talk about what that would look like, and like how many people, and, there are all these logistics, but, I arranged all the music for the orchestra, and then I conducted the whole show, and so I'm running rehearsals and all of that, and it was, it's really good music. And I had done that kind of stuff in church before, where like we would have a big Christmas concert and we'd hire an orchestra, but like we wanted to incorporate the orchestra on like the gospel components that don't have these orchestral arrangements. So I just would write arrangements for the orchestra to play along with the other like church musicians in our choir. So I had done that type of thing before. But yeah, so I just started to write the arrangements, and I would like send them to Stevie. He's like, oh my God, this is so good. And I'm like, okay, cool. And so, we just went through all the songs and we rehearsed. And I think for me, like, because I had done that kind of stuff, I just knew exactly kind of what needed to happen. So it was interesting working with Stevie and some of the other people, for them to maybe for the first time really see me in my element. But so yeah, we had a string quartet, 4-string players, a flute, clarinet, saxophone, trumpet, horn, trombone. And then we had like the regular sort of house band. So like keys, bass, lead guitar, drum set. I don't think we had any like auxiliary, but yeah.
I thought that was just like, the concept was just amazing.
Yeah.
Because you're right. You're talking about a hip hop album, but then you're talking about an orchestra, which you don't usually see the two. At least I don't. Like you don't usually see the two like merge. And so when it came out that you would be doing that, I was like, oh, I gotta see. Like the friends I was like, I don't care what y'all are doing, but at 2 p.m. I have to go. Yeah. And it was just an amazing. I don't even have the words for it. I don't even know how to describe it. It was just something that like I've never seen, and to be exposed to something like that, for others to be exposed to something like that on Greenwood. Yeah. It was just, I feel like it was like a once in a lifetime kind of experience, and I'm just like grateful that y'all even had like the foresight to give that to us,
And like that was the other thing, because there are other people who have done it, but I don't feel like the arrangements were very I don't feel like they fit the music. Like, it was just kind of, yeah, we have live instruments, but, I really wanted to merge the two worlds. So, Riverside, at the beginning of Riverside, there's this like bike sound to kind of let you know what's about to happen. And so, we couldn't really have that in the live recording. So I was like, I'm gonna do a flute solo. And so there's this like beautiful flute solo that opens. And then, on the track, there's that kind of da-da-da-da-da-da-da. There's a flute there. So I was like, I'm just gonna let this flute be like the superstar. But like other stuff that I had seen, it was just kind of like, okay, the orchestra's gonna play the same formats just over and over. Which, okay, cool. But you have all of these amazing musicians. They are capable of so much more.
Yeah.
And a lot of those musicians, I would say like 60 to 70%, I've worked with in a number of different times, like at church and stuff. So they know how I operate. And so there's such a good connection between us. They were like, hey, do you mind if I like take this up an octave? Or like they would just do it. And I'd be like, yeah, keep doing that. Because like, I think also the musicians enjoyed sort of the freedom that they had to not be stuck to the score and only be able to play these notes. And they know how I like to create these musical experiences. And so, sometimes they just did stuff. And I was like, oh, I don't know what you did, but like, just keep doing it.
Yeah.
Because there's this trust that we've developed. And, but yeah, that was a really, really special moment to be able to write all those arrangements. And it was also like, it was just so different. So originally they had us on the smaller stage. And I was like, hey, we have 15 orchestra musicians. So like, we cannot fit on that smaller stage. Yeah. So then they had to shuffle some things around and moved us, and then trying to do a sound check. Well, we had the biggest audio setup in terms of trying to get everybody mic'd so they could be heard in the area. And like, we didn't have like a super great sound check, but it was still like this really, really awesome experience. And I remember when we started playing, there wasn't a whole lot of people out there. At the end, when I turned around, I was like, oh my God, where did all these people come from?
It was packed.
And I think it has to do with kind of what you were saying. It was something that people had never seen before in this area. And it was, I think that is one of the sort of moments that definitely stands out of like a very special musical memory. And getting to, do it with my best friend and people that, I really love and trust. And also getting to sort of introduce myself to the Tulsa scene and like Tulsa artists. Because I had been on Fila and I did some stuff, but like this was a project that I really was with from the very beginning. Yeah. So it was a lot different than the work that I did on Fila, which was still good work. But yeah, so it was a really, really dope experience. And we want to do more stuff like that.
Good. We need it.
Because like, again, it's music.
Yeah.
Why limit ourselves when there are so many opportunities? And like somebody who has done that sort of thing well, PJ Morton. And he even, he's done a whole recording, video and audio, and has people in the studio in real time. And that's just, like, I can only imagine, to be there and get to have, like, the headphones and you're hearing everything mixed well. Like, we can do that in Oklahoma, too.
Yeah.
And we will.
And you are doing it.
Well, also that, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, to that end, one thing that I always talk about is the fact that like Tulsa has always been such a music scene.
Yeah.
I mean, we have so many like musicians who have come out of Oklahoma who have had tremendous careers. Folks who've come to Oklahoma become inspired and they go on to lead these amazing careers. So like what was it like for you to move to Tulsa within this past year and kind of become part of this like musical tradition?
I think I'm still kind of figuring that out because one, I tend to be sort of a homebody, and then I moved during the pandemic, when things were still like venues were still kind of shuttered. And so now that things are kind of opening up, I'm starting to get to know more people and see where I fit and just, meeting people, seeing what they're about, checking out their music, finding ways to collaborate. So I feel like I'm still in some ways like finding my place because I haven't had like a full Tulsa year really. So like Rush Fest is coming up, and then World Culture Music Festival will come around, and probably many other things that I haven't really got to experience yet. So I'm really excited to kind of see what Tulsa has to offer because it is, I think, definitely a substantial place for artists to like take roots and to be able to develop their brand, their audience, and yeah, I think it's a really great space that has been doing this kind of work for a long time. So it's nice to have things like Fire in Little Africa to kind of bolster on a more like national scene what has been special about Tulsa for a long time.
Yeah. So I guess to end, right now I wouldn't say Tulsa's like going through this musical like renaissance. They've gone through it, right? Like historically Tulsa has always been a space for musicians and visual artists and writers. They've been here and they've been doing their thing. But now I feel like more attention is being more attention is being brought to Tulsa, and we're finally getting the acknowledgement and the recognition that we deserve. So like, what are your thoughts about what's happening here in Tulsa, the synergy among artists of all kinds, music artists, visual artists, poets, writers? Like, what are your thoughts about what's happening here, and then your thoughts about like how you will fit into that?
I think that like the world needs to get ready because there's some shit that's gonna happen that's just gonna be mind blowing. Once like we really find sort of like the epicenter of that synergy, and find people that that we align with to collaborate, like there's just so many possibilities. And even like I've started to talk about some collaborations with people. And it's interesting because like this energy is really already there because I'm thinking about something. So I called someone in Oklahoma City to say like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. They're like, I was just typing an email. And then I meet with another artist and they're like, hey, I really would love to have like an all Black orchestra. And I'm like, oh, I'm like about to start a database of Black orchestral musicians in the state because I feel like we should have a Black orchestra in our state. So it's really kind of like wild the way that it's just already there. And so once we start to put more of those things in the atmosphere and find ways that we can accomplish that, like, hold on to your britches. Because it's gonna be a ride. So I'm really excited to start to finding my place in everything, and just put that anxiety to the side and make some good musical moments with some good musical people.
Yay! I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm gonna need you to do another orchestra to another album so I can be front and center.
Yeah, and I mean that's. Steve was just talking the other day and he was like, okay, I think I want to do an album, like the next album just recorded with only an orchestra. And I was like, man, let's do it.
That would be so dope.
So yeah, I'm really excited. I'm really, really excited. It's only up from here, and I am afraid that it just might be stuck.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely think like this is just the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And especially once we kind of like break free from certain institutions.
Correct.
That it'll be even.
Correct.
Yeah. Like.
Correct.
Like once we really make everything our own.
Because once we get this money and get this land and get our own shit.
Exactly. Yeah. Just leave us alone.
So long, bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.
So long, bye-bye.
And I think that that's kind of scary to a lot of the powers that be here.
Mm-hmm.
Like seeing that before they were able to kind of control the talent with the money, but now that people are really waking up and seeing like what they're doing, being like, nah, I'm gonna go out on my own and own my stuff. And I think that that's scary because it's like, well, then who's the talent? Who, you know what I'm saying? So.
And I think even though, like, even as an artist, that is a little scary too, because it's like the what ifs. Well, what if it doesn't work? Or, you know, if I've never seen something take place, how do I know that it can happen? So yeah, it's, I think, scary for both, but yeah, I just you just better be careful, because you're gonna look up one day.
Yeah, be on the map. We're already on the map, but just blow the map out the water.
We're gonna be the map.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's time. I mean, we're literally in the center of everything. So,
yeah,
like, instead of people having to run to New York or LA, like, you can come here.
Yeah.
Like, people did.
Right.
So.
Yeah, so I'm excited.
Do you have anything, like, to add or anything before we sign off? Any lasting thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I'm just really grateful for like the work that you're doing to highlight the lives of artists and to preserve our stories. I've been talking a lot recently about just the value in Black people telling Black stories. One, because we should just be able to tell our own stories.
Mm-hmm.
But there's kind of something you were kind of alluding to, like, you know, we don't have the capital, we don't have the capacity to do that. Like, financial capacity, we don't have like the teams and stuff in place. So that can be difficult to like have the means to tell our own stories. But there's something about, there are like important nuances that are lost in translation when other people tell our stories. Yeah. Like I recently started watching P-Valley, and I was listening to the dialects, and I was telling my sister, like, you know, a white person wouldn't necessarily pick up on the importance of like that nuance, that people in Mississippi talk like this, and for this show they need to talk like this. And yeah, like there are lots of white people telling Black stories. And, you know, I'm appreciative because people need to hear the stories, but also I want white people to use their privilege, their power to highlight the Black creatives that are doing the work and who need the resources. Yeah. Prop them up to be the center. Yeah. So that they can reap the benefits of the storytelling that is their story to tell. So yeah, if you Black and listening, tell your own story. If you white and listening, pay for a Black person to tell their own story.
Mic drop. There's nothing left to be said after that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for talking with me today, Amari, and your narrative will definitely help shape what we know about Tulsa artists from the artists themselves. So thank you so much for taking time out today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.